The crowd pressed forward, waves of bodies moving with the rhythm of the departing train. The station smelled of iron and damp concrete, of coffee spilled hurriedly on tiled floors. Announcements echoed overhead, their words blurring into noise. She stood still in the middle of it all, her small suitcase gripped so tightly the handle left red marks on her palm. Her eyes weren't on the train. They were locked on a figure at the far end of the platform, indistinct in the shifting blur of commuters, yet sharp enough to freeze her breathing. She didn't move closer. Not yet. She only watched, every second stretching until it became unbearable. The red scarf around her neck fluttered as the draft from the passing train tugged at it, twisting the fabric like a flame caught in wind. She clutched at it without thinking. That scarf, the one she once received with trembling laughter under soft streetlights, now felt like an open wound against her skin. Her hand shook. She forced it still. The man beside her brushed past and muttered, "You coming or not?" But she didn't answer. Her mind was far from here, circling back to the weight of whispered promises, the hollow sound of betrayal, and the silence that followed when trust turned into something unrecognizable. Her gaze dropped for a moment to the cracked watch on her wrist. Its glass was split, a jagged line running across the face. The second hand still ticked, stubbornly alive despite the fracture. She thought of how easily things broke: watches, words, people, and how sometimes the break was the only truth that remained. A voice rose from the crowd, laughter too familiar, too cruel. Her chest tightened. For one fleeting second, she almost stepped forward, almost let her voice cut through the noise, but instead she pressed her lips together until they hurt. She whispered only to herself, "Not yet." A child rushed past, tugging at his mother's sleeve, and the motion pulled her back into the present. Around her, life moved on without pause, people boarding trains, lovers embracing, strangers rushing toward destinations. But she stood anchored, in stillness, her thoughts sharp as broken glass. The scarf shifted again, against her throat, its color too bright, too loud, as though mocking her silence. She let her fingers linger on it one last time before she dropped her hand and let the wind have it. The red cloth unfurled, lifted, and drifted into the crowd, swallowed instantly. Gone. Her eyes searched the platform once more. The figure at the end of it turned, slowly, as if sensing her stare. And in that suspended moment, everything else, the trains, the voices, the world, fell away. The scarf was gone, swallowed by the crowd. But its absence felt heavier than its weight ever had. She let the small suitcase rest by her side, fingers tapping against the handle as if it could answer the questions rushing through her chest. For a moment, her eyes caught the blur of families reuniting, arms wrapped tight, laughter spilling into the station air. A little girl threw herself into her father's arms, the kind of embrace that seemed to make the world safe again. She turned away quickly. Safety had left her long ago. Her hand slid over the cracked watch on her wrist. The fracture line shimmered under the overhead lights, a scar preserved in glass. She remembered the day her father placed it on her wrist. "Things don't have to be perfect to keep moving," he had said, adjusting the strap carefully, his hands rough from years of labor. "It's the broken things that remind us what matters most." Back then, she had believed him. Back then, his words had carried her through the loneliness of empty kitchens and unpaid bills, through nights when silence was her only companion. Now, the ticking against her skin felt less like comfort and more like a countdown. The suitcase at her feet wasn't new either. She had carried it since she was a teenager, scuffed at the corners, the fabric worn thin. It had once been packed with borrowed dreams, schoolbooks, folded sketches, letters she never mailed. Tonight it carried only what she needed, not much at all. What mattered most wouldn't fit inside. A gust of wind swept across the platform, lifting strands of her hair across her face. She tucked them behind her ear, her eyes wandering back toward the figure at the far end. He hadn't moved much, but she knew he was watching. His stillness wasn't casual, it was deliberate. The kind of silence that pressed against her skin like a warning. Her chest tightened, breath caught between wanting to vanish and wanting to be seen. The overhead speaker cracked, announcing a delayed departure. A murmur spread through the crowd. The moment stretched longer than it should have, pressing her deeper into her own unease. She bent, fingers tightening around the suitcase handle, but didn't lift it, not yet. Her gaze flicked once more to the figure, his head tilted slightly, almost a nod, almost nothing. Her lips parted as if to speak, though no words came. The child's laughter echoed again behind her, sharp against the station's hum. She turned slowly, eyes searching the crowd, the hesitation in her steps, betraying the strength she wanted so desperately to wear. Her hand shook on the suitcase. She stopped walking. And for the first time, she allowed herself to look straight at him. The station lights flickered once, and the hum of the trains seemed to dull, as if the world itself had taken a breath. Her stare locked with his, steady, unreadable. For a moment, she wanted to look away, but something in his stillness pinned her there. That when he finally stepped forward, it wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, just a quiet rhythm of worn shoes striking the platform. She noticed the scuffed leather, the soles thinning, the edges softened by miles of untold journeys, not the shoes of a man with everything, but of someone who had lost and kept walking anyway. Her throat tightened. She shifted her weight, fingers clenching around her suitcase handle. A gust of cold air tunneled through the station. Outside began to tap against the high glass roof, faint at first, then sharper, like 1,000 small knocks, demanding to be heard. Thunder rolled in the distance. She thought of storms, how they could cleanse or destroy, depending on where they fell. The man paused a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets. When he reached for something, her breath hitched, but it wasn't a weapon. It was a wallet, edges cracked, the leather tired from years of being opened and closed. He slid something out, briefly, like checking it was still there. Small photo. She caught only a glimpse. 2 faces, blurred by time, but his thumb lingered on it too, long for it to mean anything casual. Something inside her stirred, that invisible mirror, the kind no one asks for, suddenly stood between them. She thought of her father's watch, her old suitcase, her scarf now lost in the crowd. The weight of memory pressing into the present. Was he also carrying ghosts, stitched into small objects? Her chest ached with confusion. The announcement above blared again. Final boarding. People pushed past, rushing with umbrellas, voices muffled by the rain outside. She should have joined them. Every step away from him would have been safer, easier, but she didn't move. Instead, she whispered to herself, "Why now?" The words barely made it past her lips, but the sound of her own voice startled her. His eyes, dark, quiet, met hers again. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between them was sharper than any confession. The rain intensified, streaking the glass ceiling, thunder echoing across the city. She felt it in her bones. Was this fate pulling her closer, or his hand weaving the strings? Her suitcase tilted slightly as she loosened her grip. She almost stepped forward, almost asked the question her heart was burning to spill, but the words froze. She remained standing, trembling between leaving and staying, the storm outside echoing the storm within, and in that unresolved silence, his faint, almost smile only, deepened the question she feared most. The storm outside beat harder against the station windows, streaks of water racing each other down the glass. The crowd had thinned now, most passengers already gone, leaving only scattered stragglers dragging bags and umbrellas. The emptiness made every sound sharper, the click of her suitcase wheels as she shifted it, the creak of old speakers above, the uneven rhythm of her breathing. She turned away. She almost left. Her steps carried her 3 paces toward the exit before her chest pulled tight, and something inside her refused. Her fingers dug into the suitcase handle until her knuckles whitened. She closed her eyes, whispered into the hollow air, "Don't look back, just go." But she did. He was still there, standing with that same quiet steadiness, though now something bright rested in his hand. Her breath caught. The red scarf, hers, the one the wind had stolen. The fabric hung damp and heavy in his grip, rainwater dripping from its frayed edges. It was impossible. She had watched it disappear into the crowd, and yet, there it was, returned, like a ghost, refusing to stay buried. Their eyes locked again. He lifted it slightly, not as an offering, not quite, but as if to remind her, "I was watching, even when you thought I wasn't." Her throat tightened. Her father's words echoed unbidden. "It's the broken things that remind us what matters most." She didn't know if this was memory's comfort or its curse. A pair of older women walked by, their eyes flicking toward the man, then toward her, whispering under their breath. She caught fragments. Strange, too close, shouldn't linger. Society's quiet judgment. The way strangers weigh stories without ever knowing them. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The scarf in his hand seemed heavier than her suitcase. 1,000 questions pressed against her lips, but none found shape. The silence between them thickened, charged, almost unbearable. Finally, his voice broke through, low and almost poetic. Some people carry more than just bags. They carry silence. The words landed on her like rain, soft, yet impossible to ignore. She wanted to ask him what silence he carried, whose faces lived in the creases of his wallet, why he stood there as if tethered to her by something neither of them named. Instead, all she managed was a whisper, cracked and trembling. Why me? He didn't answer. His gaze lowered, almost tender, as he folded the scarf once in his hand. Her knees weakened. She gripped the suitcase tighter, torn between fleeing into the storm or reaching for what he held. The scarf swayed between them, a bridge and a blade, and with the station lights buzzing above, the moment frozen, resolved, raw, trembling with the weight of everything unspoken. The scarf remained between them, red against the washed-out gray of the station. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, as though the air itself resisted entering her lungs. He didn't move closer, didn't press the moment. Yet the silence wrapped around her tighter than any embrace. Then, without a word, he slipped the scarf into the inside pocket of his coat, and the motion revealed something else. Papers, a folder, edges curled from rain, stamped with the logo she recognized instantly. Her pulse, stuttered. It was the company she had applied to 2 weeks ago, the one interview she had pinned all her fragile hope upon, the place she believed might finally pull her out of endless nights of borrowed money and unanswered calls. Her mind raced, her suitcase wobbled against her side. She whispered, almost to herself, "No, it can't be." But the truth was written too clearly, his name on the folder's cover. He wasn't just someone passing through. He was the owner, the man whose shadow stretched over her future before she had even stepped through the door. Her father's voice returned like a strike. Things don't have to be perfect to keep moving. The watch on her wrist ticked louder, almost mocking, because now she understood her cracked glass, her broken dreams. They weren't accidents of fate. They were threads pulling her here, to this exact crossing. Her gaze fell to the scarf again. When he pulled it out once more, smoothing the soaked fabric between his hands, he spoke quietly, almost to the fabric itself. "It belonged to my daughter. She used to wear it on stormy days." The world tilted beneath her feet. The scarf she thought was hers, always hers, suddenly wasn't. It carried someone else's silence, someone else's loss. The way his thumb lingered on its threads made her chest ache in recognition. She wanted to scream, to demand why he carried her life inside his pocket, why everything she thought was chance now bled into design. Instead, her lips parted with a hollow echo of her earlier words. "Why me?" This time, his eyes lifted, meeting hers with a gaze that seemed to know too much. "Because broken things," he said, voice steady, "always find each other." Her knees threatened to give way. The scarf, the watch, the folder, they weren't coincidences. They were chains, and she had already locked herself inside them. She reached for the suitcase, dragging it forward on trembling wheels, not toward the exit but toward the glass doors that led deeper into the building beyond the station. Her steps faltered only once before she pushed through, whatever waited on the other side. She knew she had crossed the point of no return. Storm had softened into a drizzle by the time she entered the glass-walled room beyond the platform. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, cold and merciless, reflecting her pale face in the windows. She let the suitcase drop beside her with a dull thud, her hands trembling as though they belonged to someone else. He followed, not with haste, not with hesitation, but with the same steady rhythm as before. His presence filled the room like smoke, quiet, lingering, impossible to ignore. She turned to face him, her voice raw. "Why me? Why all of this?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he withdrew the red scarf from his pocket, still damp, and held it between them. His hand shook, not much, but enough for her to notice. "This was hers," he said at last. "My daughter. She wore it on the day she never came back." The words struck harder than thunder. Her breath hitched, and for a fleeting second, she saw herself in the ghost. He described another girl lost in silence, swallowed by betrayal and absence. He stepped closer, placing the scarf in her hands. The weight of it nearly buckled her knees. The threads clung to her fingers, carrying more than fabric, grief, memory, unfinished love. "I chose you," he said softly, "not for who you are, but for who you remind me of." Her chest tightened, torn between fury and pity, between the ache of being nothing more than a shadow and the tenderness of being seen at all. The cracked watch ticked loudly on her wrist. Her father's words replayed, It's the broken things that remind us what matters most. Only now she understood. Sometimes broken things were used, not healed. Tears blurred her vision. She could have walked away. She could have hurled the scarf at him and left him to drown in his silence. But something shifted. She thought of her father's hands, rough and tired. She thought of the girl in the photograph tucked into his wallet, the laughter she would never return, and she realized her sacrifice would be choice. She pressed the scarf back into his hand, curling his fingers around it. "She's yours," she whispered. "Not me." For the first time, his composure cracked. His jaw trembled, his gaze dropped. He clutched the scarf as though it were air itself, as though without it, he might collapse entirely. The rain tapped gently now against the glass, a softer rhythm. The station beyond had emptied, silence stretching like an open field. She bent, lifted her suitcase, and this time she didn't hesitate. She walked toward the doors, her reflection a blur against the wet glass dot at the threshold. She paused, looking back just once. His figure stood alone, framed by the fluorescent light, the scarf clutched to his chest like a lifeline. The image seared itself into her memory, not love, not fate, but something in between. Her lips parted, and though she knew he might never hear, she left the words hanging in the air like a final truth. Not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever. The city was quieter after the storm. Puddles reflected streetlights in fractured pools, each ripple scattering the world into softer shapes. She walked alone, suitcase rolling behind her, not rushing anymore. Her steps were slower, steadier, as though she carried less weight now, even though nothing in her hands had changed. When she reached her apartment, she let the door close gently behind her and stood in the dim silence. The cracked watch still ticked on her wrist, stubborn as always. She unclasped it slowly, brushing her thumb across the line of fractured glass. For years it had felt like proof of survival, like a reminder of what she had to hold on to. Tonight, it felt different, less like a burden, more like a witness. She placed it carefully in the top drawer of her desk, leaving it under the small lamp's glow. The ticking faded into the background, softer, as though it could finally rest. To dot her reflection in the window looked back at her, tired but alive. She thought of the scarf, how it had belonged to another girl, another story. She thought of him, clutching it as if the world might disappear if he let go. A part of her still ached with questions, but she didn't chase them anymore. Some truths were meant to stay unfinished. She whispered into the empty room, "Sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition." The words steadied her, because that's what it had been, in its strangest way, recognition. Two broken paths colliding, not to mend each other, but to reflect what they carried. Outside, the rain began again, soft, almost cleansing. She pulled the window open slightly, letting the cool air touch her face. For the first time in a long time, she felt her breath deepen without force. She lay down on the couch instead of her bed, suitcase still by the door, unopened. Her hand rested against her chest as if holding her own heartbeat, and her eyes closed. Slowly, not in surrender, but in quiet strength. Somewhere in the station, he might still be standing, clutching a scarf. Somewhere, another story was unfolding, just as unfinished, just as fragile. And that was enough, because not every meeting is meant to last. Not every silence is meant to be filled. Some are there only to remind us what it feels like to be seen, even for a fleeting moment. The night stretched onward, patient and unbroken, and the truth lingered, quiet yet piercing. Sometimes the people who break us open aren't the ones who stay, but the ones who teach us how to walk away differently.